Hello everyone, I'm Dennis Lamoureux. Over the last 30 or so years, there is a term that has caused a lot of confusion in discussions over science and religion, and it is the term intelligent design. So in this brief video, I'm going to define this term and make some suggestions on how we can use it in a more effective and accurate way. Now, I'm quite aware that going to Google and the internet for information can be quite risky at times. But I'm doing so because it reveals to us how the term intelligent design is being used in our culture today. So if you type into Google, who first proposed intelligent design, the answer you will find is this. Philip Johnson is known as the father of intelligent design. The idea in its current form appeared in the 1980s, and Johnson adopted and developed it after Darwinian evolution came up short, in his opinion, in explaining how all organisms, including humans, came into being. Please note the qualification regarding the idea of intelligent design in its current form. This is an important qualification because the present or current understanding of intelligent design within modern culture is not the traditional understanding of intelligent design, as I will explain in this video. To be sure, Philip Johnson is the father of intelligent design theory. Johnson was a professor of law at the University of California, Berkeley. His book in 1991, Darwin on Trial, launched the ID movement. Johnson's academic specialty is analyzing legal arguments, and he claimed that Darwin's theory of evolution would fail if it was tried in a court of law. Now, there's no doubt about it. The title of this book is quite clever. A significant percentage of American Christians do not accept evolution, and this book was extremely popular. In his book, Johnson sets down the terms of the debate. He writes, "This book is creationist only in the sense that it juxtaposes a paradigm of intelligent design with the dominant paradigm of naturalistic evolution, and makes the case for the former. It does not rely upon the authority of the Bible." Please note that Johnson uses the term paradigm. This term is used in science to mean the major idea that unifies a scientific discipline. For example, in biology, the theory of evolution is the paradigm that all biologists use to understand living organisms. In this passage, Philip Johnson is proposing that intelligent design is another scientific paradigm, just like the theory of evolution. In addition, note that Johnson states that the paradigm of intelligent design does not rely upon the authority of the Bible. In other words, Johnson is claiming that intelligent design is a scientific theory and not a religious belief. But is this true? We will explore this a bit later. So here is where I first personally encountered ID theory. The 1994 C.S. Lewis Summer Institute was at Queen's College in the University of Cambridge in England. The conference was entitled Cosmos and Creation, Chance or Dance. I still consider this two-week conference the best conference I've ever attended. It was wonderful. The conference focused on science and religion, and in particular, the issue of origins. It attracted some of the most important scholars working on this topic, including the main leaders of intelligent design theory: Philip Johnson, Michael Behe, Stephen Meyer, William Dembski, and Paul Nelson. At this time in 1994, I was still an anti-evolutionist, so I was delighted to meet the leaders of intelligent design theory. Like me, most of these ID theorists were of a generation of Christians who are getting PhD degrees from public universities with the intention that once we finished school, we would attack the theory of evolution at these same universities. A term that the ID theorists continually repeated throughout the conference was paradigm shift. ID theorists truly believed they were ushering in a new phase in the history of science. And many of them were suggesting that within 20 to 25 years, all of science would reject evolution and accept the paradigm of intelligent design. For me, the most memorable lecture at this conference was by Michael Behe, who is a professor of biochemistry at Lehigh University. Behe gave the example of the bacterial flagellum. This is a motor-like structure in the cell membrane of bacteria. It spins around at about 1,000 RPM, and this moves bacterial cells about. Behe argued that the bacterial flagellum could not have evolved. He added that all the parts of the flagellum could only have arisen together at the same time. The famous Christian philosopher William Lane Craig was in this session, and he immediately asked, what caused the flagellum to arise? Amazingly, Behe did not answer the question. He was silent, and the silence was awkward. I thought the answer to this question was obvious. It was God who miraculously intervened to create the flagellum. Craig even asked this question 2 more times, and 2 more times Behe was silent. It was only a number of years later that I came to understand why Michael Behe did not answer William Lane Craig's question. The reason why there is no mention of God by ID theorists like Behe is because they want a scientific theory for public schools. By not mentioning God, ID theorists were attempting to put their ID paradigm on the same level as the scientific paradigm of biological evolution. But make no mistake, ID theorists believe it was definitely God who put together complex biochemical structures like the flagellum. It is worth noting that in 1996, Michael Behe published his book, Darwin's Black Box, in which he coined the term irreducible complexity. He again used the example of the bacterial flagellum and claimed that it was irreducibly complex in that it could not have evolved through natural processes. The idea of irreducible complexity spread quickly throughout the Christian community, and it was seen as a strong scientific proof that evolution is false. There was so much interest in ID theory that even the scientific community took notice of it. But scientists were quick to respond that the bacterial flagellum was not irreducibly complex. In fact, about 40 of the 42 proteins that make up the flagellum are in the cell membrane having other functions. The creation of the flagellum is through a common evolutionary mechanism called recruitment, in that previous biological components come together to form new structures. It is truly remarkable how this idea of intelligent design spread widely throughout the culture. In my opinion, there are 2 reasons why ID theory captured the attention of so many people. First, most people accept the idea that nature points to some sort of a creator. In other words, the beauty, complexity, and functionality in the natural world gives nearly everyone an intuition that nature is intelligently designed. Second, we are a scientific culture, and the moment you put the scientific term theory next to a belief in intelligent design that most people hold, the result is a very powerful term that grips our attention, especially those who reject evolution. Let me suggest that if we're going to be accurate, intelligent design theory should be called interventionistic design theory. The reason is because this so-called irreducible complexity arises through miracles by God to make structures like the flagellum. In other words, intelligent design really refers to divine interventions. In theology, we have a term for this. It is called the God of the gaps. This is the idea that there are gaps in nature where God intervenes miraculously, like the creation of the flagellum, according to ID theorists. But the history of science has revealed, every time a religious person claims that God acts in nature, it is usually a gap in their knowledge of the natural processes of the physical world and not a place where God actually intervenes with miracles. And as the scientific community has pointed out, the flagellum did not arise through a divine intervention, but it can be accounted for by the evolutionary process of recruitment. In the light of my previous comments, it is clear that intelligent design theory has set up a false dichotomy in both religious circles and the culture at large. They're forcing people into believing that there are only two choices on origins. In other words, there are only two scientific paradigms: evolution with only natural processes and no God, and intelligent design with divine interventions from God. But I have a few questions. Is there a middle ground position? A position that accepts both biological evolution and intelligent design without divine interventions? A view of origins where God created through evolution to produce intelligently designed creatures? The answer to my questions is a definite yes. Evolutionary creation is the belief that God created the universe and living organisms through an ordained, sustained, and intelligently designed evolutionary process. In other words, God ordered the process of evolution, God sustained the process of evolution through time, and God designed the process of evolution. More specifically, evolutionary creation is the belief that evolution is intelligently designed and creates intelligently designed living creatures. In other words, instead of the God of the gaps, evolutionary creation accepts the God of the self-assembling creation. It must be emphasized that evolutionary creation accepts the traditional definition of intelligent design. No, intelligent design is not a scientific theory or a scientific paradigm. Instead, it is the belief that beauty, complexity, and functionality seen in nature reflect the rational mind of an intelligent designer. To use the theological term, intelligent design refers to natural revelation. This is the belief that God reveals through nature and that nature points to God. This belief is also known as natural theology. I think it's important to examine how the term intelligent design has been used in the past. As we'll see, the traditional definition of intelligent design has nothing to do with miraculous divine interventions as promoted by intelligent design theorists today. Let's look at a few historical examples. It should be pointed out, historical records show that the idea of intelligent design goes as far back as the ancient Greeks, and undoubtedly even further back than that. One of the best known examples of a person who accepted design in nature is William Paley. The title of his famous 1802 book confirms this. Natural Theology, or Evidence of the Existence and Attributes of the Deity, that is God, collected from appearances in nature. Paley uses the term design over 150 times in his book, and he offers countless examples in nature that point toward the existence of God. Most importantly, for Paley, there are no divine interventions connected to intelligent design. Instead, Paley's view of design involved the impact of nature on people in the present. Design did not deal with how design arose in nature, but that design in nature hits everyone hard. This next example will surprise many of you. Even Charles Darwin used the term intelligent design, and he used the traditional definition of design. In a letter to John Herschel in 1861, he writes, "The point which you raise on intelligent design has perplexed me beyond measure. One cannot look at this universe with all living productions and man without believing that all has been intelligently designed." We need to remember that this letter was written 2 years after Darwin published his most famous book on evolution, The Origin of Species. And in this book, Darwin was adamantly opposed to the God of the gaps. So, like William Paley, there are no divine interventions connected to intelligent design for Darwin. And similar to Paley's view of design, it was the impact of nature on Darwin in the present that led him to consider the belief in intelligent design. Let me close this brief examination of the traditional definition of intelligent design. Design in nature has nothing to do with miraculous interventions by God as promoted by the intelligent design theorists. Instead, the traditional definition of intelligent design deals with the experience that nature reflects design and that it hits everyone hard. Intelligent design does not deal with how design arose in nature. In other words, the intelligent design theorists have concocted an entirely new, and I will say, mistaken understanding of design. There is another milestone document by the intelligent design theorists that I need to mention. In 1998, they wrote The Wedge, which outlined their future objectives and goals. Philip Johnson often claimed that he was the cutting edge of the wedge that would split the theory of evolution apart. One of their 5-year objectives was to have 2 universities where design theory has become the dominant view. And a 20-year goal was to see intelligent design theory as the dominant perspective in science. As I noted earlier, right from the beginning, ID theorists saw themselves as bringing in a major paradigm shift in science by replacing evolution with their God of the gaps anti-evolutionism. Another milestone with ID theory is the legal case in 2005 of Kitzmiller versus Dover, when ID theorists attempted to teach their anti-evolutionary theory in public schools in Dover, Pennsylvania. It was a crushing defeat for them when the presiding judge, John Jones III, concluded, "The overwhelming evidence at the trial established that ID theory is a religious view, a mere relabeling of creationism, and not a scientific theory." The final milestone in ID theory that I want to mention is their publication in 2017 of a 1,000-page book criticizing theistic evolution. This is the idea that God created through an evolutionary process. What is truly shocking about the book is that there are 250 pages on theology, and this book has over 1,500 Bible verses. In this way, ID theorists have betrayed their original plan of offering an entirely science-based scientific theory. Remember what Philip Johnson stated in his book, Darwin on Trial in 1991. The paradigm of intelligent design, quote, does not rely upon the authority of the Bible, but this 2017 book is more evidence to support Judge John Jones III's conclusion. ID theory is a religious view, a mere relabeling of creationism, and not a scientific theory. Let's examine a couple passages from this book by Stephen Meyer, who today is considered to be the most important ID theorist in the world. He writes, Jewish and Christian scriptures clearly affirm that God has caused change over time, not only in human history, but also in the process of creating the world and different forms of life. Stephen Meyer adds, indeed, the Bible describes God as not only acting to create the universe in the beginning, it also describes him as presently upholding the universe in its orderly concourse, and also describes him as acting discreetly as an agent within the natural order. Clearly, God acting discreetly as an agent within the natural order is the God of the gaps. In other words, Stephen Meyer is using the Bible like a book of science to justify his belief that God intervenes with miracles to create. And it is obvious in this passage that Stephen Meyer uses the Bible like a book of science. He writes, those who think a natural reading of the Genesis 1 account of creation suggests that different kinds of plants and animals reproduce only after their kind and do not vary beyond some fixed limit in their morphology. These people question the theory of universal common descent, that is evolution, on biblical grounds. In other words, Meyer rejects evolution because the Bible states plants and animals are static and do not change. The view of biblical interpretation that Stephen Meyer is promoting in these three previous slides is known as scientific concordism or simply concordism. Scientific concordism is the assumption the facts of science align with the Bible. Stated another way, scientific concordism is the assumption that God revealed scientific facts in the Bible thousands of years before their discovery by modern science. However, the question must be asked, is scientific concordism a feature or characteristic of the Bible? My answer to this question regarding scientific concordism is no. Scientific concordism is not a feature of the Bible. One simple diagram explains why. The Bible has an ancient understanding of the physical world, such as the three-tier universe. For example, in Genesis 1, on the second day of creation, God creates a hard structure called the firmament to hold back a heavenly sea. This is quite reasonable because there is a great big blue dome above our heads. And on the fourth day of creation, God places the sun, moon, and stars in the firmament. Isn't this what we see from the perspective of the naked eye? And if you look up all the Bible verses on this diagram, you will see that the Bible has an ancient science. So, if the Bible has an ancient astronomy like the firmament, it is only consistent that the Bible also has an ancient biology. I need to say a bit more on this idea of ancient biology. From the perspective of the naked eye, ancient people would have seen that a goat gives birth to a goat, which gives birth to a goat, which gives birth to a goat, etc., etc. They did not see goats changing into different creatures, and of course they did not have the fossil record as we do today. Therefore, to believe that plants and animals were static and did not change was very logical. And this idea appears in the Genesis 1 account of creation in the Bible with the phrase, after their kinds, stated 10 times. So when the leading ID theorist, Stephen Meyer, states that the Bible does not refer to evolution, he's right. But Meyer completely fails to realize is that his argument about separate kinds of living organisms is based on an ancient science. In other words, ID theory is not promoting modern science, but instead ancient science. Let's now bring this short video to a conclusion. What is intelligent design theory? It is the God of the gaps rooted in concordism. It is a religious theory that parades and charades as a scientific theory, but ID theory is ultimately based on a poor and misguided reading of the Bible. Before ending, I'd like to offer you a few resources. I've written a review of the 1,000-page ID theory book, Theistic Evolution. The date is significant. 2018 is 20 years after the Wedge document, where ID theorists predicted a major paradigm shift in biology, from the evolutionary paradigm to the intelligent design paradigm. But here is the hard fact. There is not one university in the world that has shifted to ID theory. I also have a short paper in a debate with Michael Behe, where I argue that his proposed black box in biology, like the origin of the flagellum, is only a black hole in our knowledge. And as I mentioned in this video, scientists now argue that the flagellum arose through the evolutionary mechanism of recruitment. Finally, I debated Philip Johnson in this book in 1999. If you read the book, you'll see there wasn't much of a debate. And no one should be surprised because a lawyer is not a biologist. To be sure, Johnson was a very talented specialist in legal arguments. But before he can apply his special analytical skills and evaluate evolution, he needs to have a very good knowledge of evolutionary theory. I'll admit, I was frustrated with him not engaging me. And I even asked him how many university-level courses in biology had he taken. Johnson never answered my question. And I think that is the answer. I'd like to close with a short personal reflection. Every time I think about intelligent design theory, my heart shudders a bit. I often wonder that if I had never done a PhD in theology with a focus on the creation accounts in the Bible, whether I would be an ID theorist today. Like nearly all Christians, I was a scientific concordist when I started graduate school in theology. But once I discovered the Bible is not a book of science, I was freed from concordism and free to deal with the scientific evidence for evolution. And although I started my second PhD with a focus on tooth evolution, I was a very firm anti-evolutionist. I was aware that if the evidence supported evolution, it would have no effect on my Christian faith. And that's exactly what happened. After seeing the evidence for evolution, day in and day out, over 3.5 years, I accepted evolution as God's method to create living organisms. Finally, I must comment on what I see as a serious problem with ID theory. There is no doubt that their view of design has dominated the Christian world and also the secular world. In doing so, ID theorists have given the church and our culture a view of intelligent design that is not traditional, not biblical, and frankly, not correct. Intelligent design has nothing to do with miraculous divine interventions. As I mentioned, intelligent design theory should be called interventionistic design theory. Intelligent design deals with how nature impacts us. For most of us, the beauty, complexity, and functionality in nature firmly points to an intelligent designer. So yes, I believe in intelligent design because for me, intelligent design in nature is beyond a reasonable doubt. End of episode.